In a small, secluded village, nestled between green hills, life followed a pace set by the seasons. The earth was rich with the scent of wet soil after rain, and the sounds of daily life filled the air. Children's laughter, the crow of roosters at dawn, and the distant hum of the river flowing lazily by. The homes in the village were simple, made of mud and stone, with thatched roofs that sagged under the weight of time and the elements. Narrow, winding streets led to the market, where villagers gathered at each morning to exchange fresh vegetables, woven baskets, and handmade goods. The sun beat down during the day, casting long shadows across the dirt paths, while the evening brought a cool breeze that swayed the tall trees lining the roads. Despite the village's isolation, there was a warmth to it, a sense of familiarity and community. Everyone knew everyone else, and life, while humble, had a rhythm that felt constant, even comforting. Among the villagers was Zara, a woman whose quiet strength and resilience had made her a figure of respect in the community. Her family had lived in the village for generations, and though they had little in the way of wealth, they had always survived through hard work and unity. Zara's days were long, filled with chores, tending to the small garden behind her house, cooking meals, and taking care of the elderly villagers who needed help. Despite the hardships she faced, Zara always had a smile for everyone. She was known for her kindness, her generosity, and her willingness to help without expecting anything in return. Her hands, calloused from years of labour, were always reaching out to help those in need, whether it was offering a meal to a neighbour in need or lending a hand with a difficult task. But Zara's life was not as easy as it appeared. Beneath her calm exterior lay the weight of countless unspoken worries. Her husband, Bilal, was a man of few words, often quiet and withdrawn. He loved her in his own way, but his work as a labourer in the fields left him exhausted, and their relationship had become distant over time. They had a small child together, a daughter named Samira, who Zara adored with every fibre of her being. Samira was her light, the one thing that kept her going on the hardest days. Still, Zara's life was not without its struggles. There was a tension in her family that no one spoke of directly, an unspoken friction between her and her mother, Fatima. Fatima, while loving, had always held on to old traditions, her beliefs about how a woman should behave, what sacrifices she should make for the family. Zara, on the other hand, had always dreamed of more. She wanted to escape the poverty that had bound her family for so long, and she was willing to make hard choices to do so. But sometimes her desires conflicted with her mother's vision for her life. Fatima believed in preserving the old ways, even if they meant living in hardship. Zara, though, was ready to take risks, to push boundaries in search of a better future, not just for herself, but for her daughter, Samira. The village, for all its beauty, had its own struggles. The crops were often unreliable, the rains unpredictable, and money was scarce. It was a life of constant work, a life of survival. But for Zara, the choice was clear. Do whatever it took to give Samira the life she deserved, even if it meant making impossible decisions. And as the weight of the years pressed down on her, Zara found herself at a crossroads. The choices she had to make now would change everything. One night, when the wind howled outside and the village slept beneath a blanket of stars, Zara's world tilted. It was a decision she never imagined she would have to make, one that would tear at her heart. But there was no going back. In the quiet of her small home, with Samira asleep in the next room, Zara made a choice that would define her future, and the future of her family. The village had always been a place of stability for Zara, even if her life there had been far from easy. Her days were full of hard work, but they also had a predictable rhythm, a sense of control. That is, until one fateful evening when everything changed. It began with a visit from her father, who had been away for months working in a distant town. Zara had always looked up to him, though their relationship was often strained because of his long absences. He arrived unexpectedly, his face grim, his eyes avoiding hers as he took a seat at the family table. Without wasting time on pleasantries, he revealed a devastating piece of news. Her family's land, which had been in their care for generations, was about to be taken away. There had been a dispute over ownership, one that Zara had never even heard of. Her father's creditor, a wealthy and influential man from a neighbouring village, had placed a claim on the land, and now it was no longer theirs. This meant not only the loss of their home, but also the end of any hope for a better future. The blow was sudden, shocking, and completely out of Zara's control. She'd always worked hard to care for her family and believed that if they kept their heads down, life would eventually improve. But now, in one swift stroke, everything she had worked for was at risk. This news struck Zara like a physical blow. Her father's voice was low, his words hanging in the air as if he, too, had given up hope. Zara's heart raced. She could see the fear in her mother's eyes and the tension between her parents as they silently discussed what to do. Then came the most devastating part of the conversation. Zara's father had already agreed to a solution. In exchange for their land, he had promised Zara's hand in marriage to the wealthy man who had claimed the land. It was an arrangement made out of sheer desperation, one that Zara's father believed would protect the family from complete ruin. The man, a merchant with connections and power, had demanded Zara as his bride in return for his mercy. He wasn't interested in love or respect. He was merely buying her future in exchange for the land. The room grew silent, Zara's pulse pounding in her ears. Her father's eyes avoided hers, and her mother's gaze seemed to be filled with both sorrow and resignation. No one said anything, but the weight of the decision hung between them all. It was a betrayal of the life Zara had hoped to build for herself. The choice, made without her consent, was now forcing her into a future she had never imagined. Zara was stunned. Her mind raced through countless thoughts, emotions flooding her: anger, fear, confusion. She'd always known her family struggled, but to be traded like a commodity, as though her future didn't belong to her, was a humiliation she could barely process. But it wasn't just the betrayal of her father's decision that hurt Zara. It was the injustice of it. She had worked so hard, fought so tirelessly to carve out a better life for herself and her daughter, Samira. And now, in one crushing moment, all of her dreams were dashed. She was to be a pawn in a game that wasn't even hers to play. Her thoughts raced as she struggled to come to terms with the situation. How could this be happening? How could her family, her own flesh and blood, make such a decision for her, without even considering her wishes, her future? This moment marked the beginning of Zara's unraveling. What had once seemed like a stable, if difficult life, had now become a cage. She had never felt so trapped, so powerless. The realization that she had no control over her fate, no control over her own future, or even her daughter's, was overwhelming. And yet, amidst the pain and the crushing weight of this new reality, a flicker of defiance began to stir inside her. Zara wasn't a woman who had ever given up easily. She had fought for her family before, and she would do it again. But now, she knew that the fight ahead would be unlike anything she had faced before. In the days that followed, Zara began to see the first glimpses of those who would oppose her. Her father's decision to trade her future had not come from a place of malice, but from a place of weakness and fear. But there were others in the village who would seek to control her in ways even more cruel. Her father's creditor, the wealthy merchant, became a looming figure of oppression in her mind. His cold, calculating nature was everything Zara feared, an embodiment of a life that would crush her spirit. Zara's journey had begun, but it was not just one of survival. It was one of defiance. The road ahead would be long and the challenges even greater. But Zara had something to fight for now. Her future, her daughter's future, and the right to live life on her own terms. In the days and weeks following Zara's forced engagement to the wealthy merchant, her life began to spiral in ways she had never anticipated. Her father's decision had shattered the fragile sense of stability she once had. And now, as she braced herself for the inevitable wedding, it seemed that every part of her life was being pulled apart. Zara's relationship with her father, once a quiet bond of respect, quickly began to deteriorate. Her father, Muhammad, had been a man of simple needs. He was not cruel, but had always lived by the notion of sacrificing for the family. Zara had hoped that his decision to give her away to the merchant, Mr. Rashid, would be an isolated incident driven by desperation. But with every passing day, Zara saw a darker side to her father's choices. The decision to marry her off was a blow to Zara's sense of identity, but what hurt even more was her father's refusal to acknowledge the pain he had caused her. He told her that this was the only way to save the family from ruin. This marriage was their only chance to keep the land, to ensure that Samira would have a future. When Zara tried to protest, to explain how much this choice hurt her, Muhammad would only respond with cold, dismissive words. "This is for your own good, Zara. You'll see, in time." His refusal to listen, to understand, fueled a growing sense of betrayal inside her. Zara began to resent the silence that stretched between them, the emotional chasm that had widened since that fateful night. It wasn't long before Mr. Rashid came to the village. His presence was imposing. A tall man with sharp, calculating eyes who radiated power and wealth. The villagers were wary of him, knowing that his interests were always rooted in what he could gain. To Zara, he was a symbol of everything she had come to despise. The ruthless, wealthy men who used their influence to manipulate those beneath them. Rashid visited her family often, under the guise of discussing wedding arrangements, but each visit felt more like an interrogation. He treated Zara as though she were little more than property, questioning her on trivial matters like her cooking skills, her upbringing, and even the way she carried herself. His words were laced with arrogance, and he never once looked at her with anything resembling kindness. Zara, though outwardly calm, felt as though she was shrinking under his gaze. She had been through many hardships, but none as dehumanizing as this. Every time she tried to speak up, to defend herself, or assert her right to make her own decisions, Rashid would dismiss her with a cold laugh or a sneer. "Women like you are not meant for choices, Zara," he would say. "Your duty is to the family and to me." The merchant's visits escalated into regular threats, promises of what would happen if Zara didn't comply with the terms of the engagement. He made it clear that he could ruin her family in an instant, and that her father's land was as good as his if Zara did not marry him. His power, combined with her father's reluctant compliance, felt suffocating. Zara began to feel as though she were drowning in a world that no longer felt like her own. Despite the overwhelming pressure, Zara refused to let the situation defeat her. Though she was exhausted, both emotionally and physically, she refused to lose her sense of self. She started meeting with the women of the village, confiding in them about her fears and listening to their stories. Some of them, like Mariam, a widow who had been through similar struggles, shared their wisdom and supported her when she was feeling most vulnerable. They taught Zara how to navigate the subtle power struggles within the village and how to find small ways to resist. Zara's internal conflict deepened as she wrestled with her feelings of guilt and anger. She loved her family, and she wanted to protect Samira, but she could not accept being married off like cattle. Her dreams of a better life, one where she could make her own choices, decide her own future, felt further and further out of reach. Still, in the darkest moments, she found small sparks of courage. One evening, as Rashid's visits grew more frequent, Zara took a bold step. When he asked her, once again, about her willingness to marry him, Zara finally looked him in the eye. "I will never marry you," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling fear in her heart. "You may have my father's land, but you will never have my will." Rashid was not pleased. He laughed mockingly, then turned cold. He threatened to have Zara's family thrown out onto the streets, to strip them of everything they owned. But Zara stood firm, refusing to back down. "If I must lose everything, I will do so on my own terms," she responded, her voice growing stronger with each word. This moment marked a significant turning point for Zara. She could feel the walls closing in, but she knew she had to resist. She was not just fighting for her own freedom, but for her daughter's future. The small spark of defiance she had ignited in herself now became a fire that burned brightly. No matter how many times Rashid or her father tried to push her into submission, Zara would not bend. As Zara's defiance grew, so did the animosity from those around her. The villagers, once supportive and familiar, began to turn their backs on her. There were whispers, rumours that Zara was a disgrace to her family, that she was causing trouble where there was none. The women who had once supported her now withdrew, fearful of crossing Mr. Rashid. Even Mariam, who had been her greatest ally, began to distance herself. "Sometimes, Zara, you don't know when to stop," Mariam whispered one day as she gently pulled away from her. "This fight may not be yours to win." The sting of betrayal cut deep, but Zara understood. The village was afraid of Mr. Rashid's power, afraid of losing their own livelihoods. What hurt the most was that Zara had been abandoned by those who should have stood by her, those who understood the same struggles. Now, she was truly alone. But with each rejection, Zara grew more determined. The weight of betrayal only made her fight harder, made her more resolute in her resolve to take back control of her life. If she had to do it alone, she would, as Zara faced each new challenge, from her father's emotional distance to the increasing threats from Mr. Rashid. She found herself leaning into her resilience. Each moment of suffering, each betrayal, strengthened her resolve. She would fight for her daughter's future, for the life that was rightfully hers. Her journey was just beginning, and she knew that though the road ahead would be fraught with danger and loss, she would face it head-on, refusing to be broken. The tension in Zara's life continues to escalate, with each passing day bringing new hurdles that test both her resolve and her spirit. Though she had expected resistance from her father and Mr. Rashid, the pressure from the world around her becomes a constant, suffocating force. Her path to defying her arranged marriage is fraught with danger. Each time she stands firm, something or someone pushes her back. Zara had hoped that by standing up to Mr. Rashid, she had made her position clear. But his power and influence in the village were far greater than she had imagined. One afternoon, as Zara is busy preparing food for her family, Rashid shows up unexpectedly at her doorstep with two of his guards. His presence is heavy, almost suffocating, and his arrogance fills the air. "You think your defiance will change anything, Zara?" Rashid says, his voice smooth, like the cold steel of a blade. His eyes scan the small home she had worked so hard to build, and Zara feels his contempt as if it's physical. "I came to remind you that there are consequences for your actions, and if you continue down this path, you'll lose everything." Zara's heart pounds, but she stands her ground. "I will never be your wife," she replies, her voice trembling only slightly. The guards behind Rashid step forward menacingly, and Zara's eyes narrow. The silence between them stretches long before Rashid smirks and turns away. "You will learn that every rebellion has its price," he says, just before leaving. His words hang in the air like poison, settling over her like a curse. This encounter leaves Zara shaken, but it also strengthens her determination. She realizes that Rashid will stop at nothing to break her spirit, and this will be a much harder battle than she anticipated. Zara's resolve is further tested when her mother, Fatima, begins to act more distant. Zara, who has always relied on Fatima for emotional support, notices her mother's growing coldness. Their interactions become increasingly strained, and Zara feels an aching void where her mother's affection once was. One evening, as Zara sits with Fatima in their small kitchen, preparing a meal for the family, the tension comes to a head. "You should listen to your father," Fatima says quietly, her voice low and laced with sadness. "This marriage, it's the only way. We will lose everything if you don't." Zara looks up sharply, her heart sinking. "You too, Mother? How can you say this? Don't you care about what this will do to me?" she says, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't be sold like this. I won't let my life be decided by someone else." Fatima's face falters for a moment, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She reaches out, touching Zara's arm gently. I know this is hard, my child, but your father, he does this for us, for your future. You'll understand when you're older. Zara's stomach turns at the implication. It is as though her mother is already resigned to this fate, willing to sacrifice her happiness for the sake of survival. I'm not a thing to be sacrificed, Zara replies fiercely, pulling away from her mother's touch. The wound of her mother's betrayal cuts deeper than Zara can express. This scene marks a moment of deep emotional conflict for Zara. She now realizes that the very people she's trying to protect might be the ones unwittingly trapping her. Her internal struggle intensifies, but so does her resolve. She knows that she can no longer rely on her family for support in this battle. If she is to survive, she must fight alone. Despite the mounting pressure and betrayals, Zara's strength is bolstered by a few unexpected allies. People who, despite the risks, stand by her side and offer her the emotional and practical support she needs. Mariam, the village widow who had quietly shared her experiences with Zara before, becomes an increasingly important figure in Zara's life. Mariam is a woman who has lived through her own struggles, having been widowed young and left to raise her children alone. She understands Zara's fight, perhaps better than anyone else. One evening, as Zara works in her garden, Mariam appears quietly at her side, offering her a basket of fresh vegetables. You're stronger than you think, Mariam says, her voice steady and comforting. There are whispers in the village about you. People talk, Zara. Not everyone is happy with the way things are going, but not everyone agrees with Mr. Rashid's ways either. Zara feels a flicker of hope. What can I do? Everyone has turned their back on me. No, Mariam says firmly, her wrinkled hand resting gently on Zara's shoulder. You're not alone. People like us, women who have fought and survived. We know the value of standing tall. Mariam shares with Zara stories of other women who had resisted similar marriages, some of them sacrificing everything for the chance to live freely. These stories offer Zara the strength to face the coming challenges. Mariam's quiet support reminds Zara that even in a village where people are afraid to act, there are those who see her struggle and recognize her worth. Though Zara's relationship with her husband, Bilal, has been strained since the engagement, he too begins to show signs of supporting her in subtle ways. He does not speak openly about his disagreement with her marriage to Mr. Rashid, but there are moments when his eyes meet hers, full of understanding and quiet sympathy. One evening, as they sit together in the dim light of their home, Zara catches him watching her. He's always been a man of few words, but there is a tenderness in his gaze that speaks volumes. I never wanted this for you, Zara, Bilal says softly, his voice almost a whisper. I've seen you fight for our family. I see the strength in you. I don't know how to help. Zara's heart softens, the heaviness in her chest lifting just a little. She looks at him, feeling the weight of their shared struggles, and in that moment, she realizes that though they are both trapped in a difficult situation, they are not entirely alone. I won't give up, she says, her voice filled with determination. I will find a way out of this. Bilal nods slowly, his silent support now clearer than ever. With each new obstacle Zara faces, from her father's coldness to the increasing threats from Rashid and her mother's resignation, the tension builds. The more Zara resists, the more brutal the consequences seem to become. Rashid's visits grow more frequent and his threats more explicit. He warns her that if she continues to defy him, her family will face dire consequences. Zara's emotional toll becomes evident. The weight of her choices presses down on her shoulders, but she is no longer willing to be passive. The suspense continues to rise as she prepares to make a final stand against the forces that seek to control her life. Every decision she makes comes with a cost, and the stakes continue to escalate. By the end of this phase, Zara's determination has grown stronger, but so has the danger. She knows she cannot fight alone, and that the consequences of her actions will be felt by everyone she loves. The suspense builds as the final confrontation looms on the horizon, with Zara poised to make the ultimate sacrifice for her freedom and her daughter's future. The escalating pressures on Zara reach their peak when her worst fears are realized. It is not just the threats from Mr. Rashid or the emotional distance from her father that break her spirit. It is the ultimate betrayal by the one person she never expected, her own sister, Samira. Samira, whom Zara had always treated with love and care, becomes an unwilling pawn in the game that Mr. Rashid is playing. The merchant's influence in the village grows stronger by the day, and Zara realizes, too late, that Rashid had been using her father's desperate need for money to manipulate and control their entire family. One afternoon, Zara returns home to find her father in a heated argument with Rashid. The tension in the air is suffocating, and Zara knows that whatever is happening is about to change everything. She tries to listen from the hallway, her heart hammering in her chest, but the muffled voices grow louder and more frantic. Finally, she steps into the room and demands to know what's going on. What she hears next cuts through her like a blade. "You can't keep resisting, Zara," her father says coldly, his back turned to her. His voice has changed. There is no warmth in it anymore, no love. Mr. Rashid has arranged a new deal. If you won't marry him, then Samira will. Zara's heart stops. Her father's eyes avoid hers, his shame palpable in the silence that follows. Samira, standing off to the side, looks down at the floor, her face pale and filled with uncertainty. But the worst part isn't the deal itself. It's the realization that Zara's sister, the one person who Zara had vowed to protect, has been given to the merchant as an alternative, as a replacement for Zara. Zara feels the weight of her father's betrayal crushing her chest. She had fought for her family's freedom, thinking she was protecting them from the worst of it, but now her father's actions have dragged Samira into the same trap Zara had been desperately trying to escape. Her mind races with a mix of anger and despair. She wants to scream, to lash out at her father, but her voice is lost in a sea of frustration. How could he do this to them? How could he throw his daughter into the hands of a man who had already shown no regard for her humanity? As the days pass, Zara becomes increasingly isolated. The anger she feels toward her father festers, and she can no longer look at him the same way. He has become a stranger to her, a man she no longer recognizes. And Samira, who had once been her confidant, has grown distant, afraid of defying their father and the power that Rashid wields. Zara's physical and emotional exhaustion takes its toll. The weight of her failure to protect her sister, combined with the mounting pressure from Mr. Rashid's threats, drives Zara to the brink. One night, she sits alone in the small garden behind her house, her hands trembling as she wipes away tears. The quiet of the night offers no comfort. Her thoughts swirl, consumed by the cruel injustice of it all. In this moment of despair, Zara feels more alone than she ever has. She is betrayed by the people she loves the most, and every option she considers seems futile. The weight of her choices presses down on her chest like a stone, and for the first time, she wonders if there's any hope left. She looks up at the stars, the familiar faces of the night sky offering no answers, only silence. But then, in the distance, she hears a soft voice. "Zara?" It's Mariam, the widow who had supported her in her darkest moments. Mariam steps into the garden, carrying a small basket of bread, her expression soft with concern. "I know you're hurting," Mariam says quietly, sitting beside Zara. "I can see it in your eyes, but I've seen strength in you, Zara, and I know you're not ready to give up." Zara doesn't say anything at first. Her mind feels clouded with despair, and the words she wants to speak feel heavy and hopeless. But Mariam's presence is a balm to her troubled heart. "Tell me what happened," Mariam urges gently. "Tell me what's in your heart." Zara takes a deep breath and begins to recount everything: her father's betrayal, the deal with Rashid, and her growing fear for Samira's future. As she speaks, the weight on her chest feels a little lighter, but the truth still stings. She feels so small in the face of the world that seems bent on destroying her. I don't know what to do anymore, Zara admits in a broken voice, her tears falling freely now. I failed. I failed my family, and I failed myself. Mariam listens patiently, her hand resting on Zara's. After a long moment of silence, she speaks again, her words carrying the weight of experience. No, Zara, Mariam says gently but firmly. You haven't failed. You fought for your family. You fought for what's right, even when it seemed impossible. And that makes you stronger than anyone I know. It's not about winning or losing. It's about the fight itself. And that fight, Zara, is far from over. Zara looks up at Mariam, her eyes searching the older woman's face for something, anything, that might offer her a glimmer of hope. She's exhausted, mentally and physically drained, but something in Mariam's words stirs something deep inside her. Maybe she hasn't lost everything after all. In the stillness of the garden, as the stars begin to fade and the first light of dawn breaks on the horizon, Zara begins to feel a small flicker of determination spark within her chest. She's not done yet. She can't afford to give up, not when her sister's future is still at stake. Though the weight of the betrayal still lingers, though the pain of her father's choices cuts deeply, Zara knows she must find a way to reclaim her family's future. The road ahead is uncertain, and the risks are high. But for the first time in a long while, Zara feels a sense of clarity. She can still fight, and fight she will. Zara's moment of crisis has passed, and the small flicker of hope that ignited in her heart during her conversation with Mariam grows stronger by the day. The days following her breakdown are filled with new resolve. The betrayals, the threats, and the weight of her father's expectations have driven Zara to the edge. But now, she understands something she hadn't before. If she doesn't act, if she doesn't take control of her own fate, then she will lose everything, herself included. The first decisive action comes when Zara decides that it's time to confront Rashid directly. She cannot wait for her father or anyone else to decide her future. With Samira's fate now tied to Rashid's cruel hands, Zara realizes she is the only one who can stop him. She can't afford to sit by and let her family fall further into his clutches. Armed with a mix of fear and determination, Zara leaves her home one evening to confront Rashid in the village square, the place where his influence is strongest. She has no grand plan, no weapon to strike him with, only her voice and the courage to stand before him. She knows this might cost her everything, her safety, her family's support, maybe even her own life. But she cannot let Rashid's shadow loom over them any longer. As Zara walks through the village, the familiar faces of the townsfolk greet her with wary eyes, some offering her sympathetic smiles, others looking away in fear. Zara has become a figure of curiosity, of quiet defiance, and today she will make her stand. She arrives at Rashid's estate, a grand house that seems to tower over the rest of the village. The gates open for her, and as she steps inside, she feels the weight of the world upon her shoulders. Inside, Rashid is sitting in his large study, casually flipping through papers when Zara enters without warning. His eyes flick up, surprised by her sudden appearance, but quickly masking it with a smug smile. "You've come to your senses, I see," he says with a low chuckle, his tone filled with arrogance. "I knew it wouldn't take long for you to realize who holds the power in this village." Zara stands tall, her back straight, her voice unwavering as she steps closer to him. "No, Rashid. I've come to put an end to this madness once and for all." She feels a wave of emotion swell in her chest. The anger, the betrayal, the pain. But she does not let it consume her. She has come too far to back down now. "I will never marry you. I will never let you control me or my sister. And if I have to fight you, I will." Rashid's face darkens, his smile slipping away as his eyes narrow. "You think you can stop me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have already set things in motion. The people you think will help you, they're all on my side, Zara. There's nothing you can do." Zara's heart pounds in her chest, but she doesn't flinch. "You may have the village under your thumb, But you do not control me. You never will. The moment is electric with tension. Zara knows she is walking a fine line, that every word she speaks could either destroy her or drive Rashid away. But something unexpected happens. Instead of lashing out in anger, Rashid's face softens slightly, almost as though he is impressed. "You've got guts, Zara," he says, his voice no longer mocking, but instead tinged with something like respect. "I didn't expect that from you." It is in this moment of shocking honesty that Zara sees something she hadn't noticed before. The power Rashid holds over her family is not invincible. He is not the untouchable villain he has always appeared to be. There is a crack in his armor. He is human. And that realization gives Zara the strength to push forward. But as she turns to leave, believing the confrontation to be over, Rashid makes an unexpected revelation. "I'll tell you something, Zara," he says, his voice softening with an unexpected sincerity. "I didn't come here to take you by force. The deal I made with your father, it was to help him. He wanted money, power, influence, but I didn't want to ruin you. I thought if I offered you Samira instead, you'd see reason." The words strike Zara like a thunderclap. She stares at him, trying to make sense of what he's just revealed. Rashid, the man who had destroyed her family's peace, who had manipulated her father, has been playing a game for his own advantage. But more importantly, he has not had the heart to hurt her. In the silence that follows, Zara is left with a decision. She could walk away, believing that Rashid's power is too great to overcome. Or she could strike at the heart of what's been holding her back, the idea that she must fight alone. Zara takes a deep breath, and for the first time in weeks, she feels a quiet sense of peace settle over her. She knows she cannot do this alone, not without the support of her family, and not without the help of those who have quietly supported her. She makes a bold decision, one that will change everything. "I'm leaving this village, Rashid," she says with renewed strength, "and I'm taking Samira with me. We will go to a place where your influence does not reach. You can have your power, but not us." Rashid looks at her for a long moment, then nods. For the first time, Zara sees a flicker of something different in his eyes, a recognition that her defiance has cost him something, but he does not stop her. Zara leaves Rashid's estate, knowing that this is not the end of the fight, but the beginning of a new chapter. The moment she steps outside the gates, a group of villagers who had been watching from afar step forward, offering her quiet support. Some bring her food, others offer a place to stay, and a few even speak of her courage in hushed, reverent tones. Zara has not only stood up to Rashid, she's shown the village that they do not have to live in fear. In the days that follow, Zara and Samira begin to make plans for their future. The road ahead will be difficult, but they are free from the shackles of Rashid's control. The final piece of her journey is not just about fighting against the antagonist. It is about choosing a life of peace, autonomy, and love. In the end, Zara realizes that the true reward for her courage is not in defeating Rashid or reclaiming her family's wealth, but in reclaiming her own dignity and agency. The conflict that once seemed insurmountable has finally been resolved, not with violence or power, but with a quiet, unwavering choice to walk away and build a better future. After Zara's bold decision to leave the oppressive influence of Rashid and her father behind, life gradually takes a turn for the better. She and her sister, Samira, settle in a nearby town where they find refuge in a tight-knit community that values hard work, honesty, and kindness. Zara, no longer burdened by the fear of control and manipulation, begins to flourish. She finds work in a small local shop, using her skills to contribute to the community. Though the work is humble, it gives her a sense of pride that she hasn't felt in years. She also enjoys the peace of knowing that every decision she makes now is her own. As time passes, Zara's life continues to improve. She forms genuine friendships with the women in the town, who respect her not only for her resilience but for her warmth and generosity. The support she receives from these new friends is a stark contrast to the isolation she felt back in her old village, where she had to constantly hide her true self. Her bond with Samira deepens, and together they build a life full of laughter, love, and possibility. One day, while working in the market, Zara meets a kind and compassionate man, someone who sees her not as a victim, but as an equal. They strike up a friendship that slowly blossoms into a deep and loving relationship. Unlike the men from her past, this man does not seek to control or manipulate her. Their love is built on mutual respect and admiration. For the first time, Zara feels truly cherished for who she is, not for what she can give or sacrifice. As her life grows richer in love and fulfillment, Zara realizes that the true rewards in life come not from wealth or status, but from inner peace, dignity, and the bonds we form with others. Meanwhile, in Zara's old village, Rashid's once strong influence begins to unravel. Without Zara's compliance, his power over the villagers fades. Her father, seeing the destruction caused by his choices, experiences deep regret. He attempts to make amends by offering support to Zara's new life, though he can never fully atone for the wrongs he has done. His relationship with Zara remains strained, but over time, there is a glimmer of reconciliation, slow, uncertain, but heartfelt. As for Rashid, his wealth and influence do not bring him happiness. Without the fear he had once cultivated, his reputation in the village starts to falter. People begin to see him for who he truly is, a man whose power was built on manipulation and cruelty. Though he remains wealthy, his influence diminishes as the villagers slowly begin to distance themselves from him. There is no dramatic downfall, but instead a quiet loss of power as people move on with their lives. Rashid's failure is not in a spectacular defeat, but in the simple truth that kindness and strength cannot be controlled or corrupted indefinitely. His schemes ultimately backfire, and he is left to reflect on the hollowness of the life he built. Zara's journey is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. It proves that, no matter how difficult the circumstances, there is always a way forward. Her story illustrates that true power comes not from controlling others, but from standing up for oneself, remaining true to one's values, and embracing the support of those who truly care. The moral takeaway is simple, yet powerful. Resilience, kindness, and a strong sense of integrity will always prevail, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Life may not always be fair, but with courage and the right heart, good will eventually triumph. As we reach the end of Zara's journey, we are reminded of the incredible power of resilience, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of a better life. Zara's story is not just hers. It reflects the struggles, triumphs, and choices that each of us faces in our own lives. How often do we find ourselves in situations where we feel trapped or powerless? Yet, like Zara, we can all find the strength to rise, reclaim our lives, and pursue what we truly deserve. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Zara's journey. Have you ever had to overcome a similar struggle, or found the courage to take control of your own fate? Share your experiences with us in the comments. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and spread the word. Let's create a community where we celebrate strength, kindness, and the belief that no matter what, good always triumphs over adversity. Tell us where you're watching from and let's connect.